My wife cheated with my boss, and they tried to ruin me. Instead, I turned the tables. I, 33M, had been married to my wife, Sarah, for nearly 5 years. We lived in a cozy suburban home, the kind of place people imagine when they think of a happy, stable couple. From the outside, everything seemed perfect. But if there's one thing I've learned, it's that appearances can be deceiving. Our marriage wasn't perfect, but I wouldn't have called it troubled. We had our ups and downs, as most couples do, but there were no major fights or glaring issues. Or so I thought. Looking back, I wonder if I missed the signs or if Sarah was just that good at hiding her betrayal. It started with small changes, subtle things that didn't seem important at the time. She began texting late at night, smiling at her phone. When I asked her who she was talking to, she'd shrug it off with vague answers like, "Just an old friend from college." It was unusual. She had never been secretive before, but now she'd quickly lock her phone whenever I entered the room. My gut told me something was off, but I didn't want to jump to conclusions. Greg, the odd obsession, the name Greg started coming up more often in our conversations. Greg was my boss, someone I admired professionally, but hadn't thought much about outside of work. Out of nowhere, Sarah seemed fixated on him. "Greg seems like such a great mentor for you," she'd say, or, "You're lucky to have someone like Greg guiding you." At first, I was pleased. Sarah had never shown much interest in my work, so I took it as a sign she wanted to be more involved. But her fascination with Greg felt personal. She asked questions that had nothing to do with my career. Was he happy in his marriage? Did he have kids? What did he do in his free time? Her curiosity about him felt excessive, but I brushed it off, convincing myself I was imagining things. The suspicion deepens one evening. I saw Greg's name pop up on her phone as an incoming message. She quickly locked her screen and placed the phone face down. "Work stuff," she said dismissively. The pit in my stomach grew. Why would my boss be texting my wife? Around the same time, Sarah started staying out late, claiming she was meeting old friends or running errands. When she didn't come home until after midnight one night, I called her phone. To my shock, Greg answered. Sarah's phone was. "Left here at the office," he stammered before hanging up. When Sarah finally came home, she spun a flimsy story about her car breaking down. I pressed her about why Greg had her phone, but she turned defensive, accusing me of not trusting her. Her reaction was classic deflection, and it only heightened my suspicion. Uncovering the truth, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was terribly wrong. Little details began to add up: receipts from restaurants I'd never been to, credit card charges for hotel stays she couldn't explain. I knew I had to find out the truth. With the help of a tech-savvy friend, I accessed her deleted texts and email backups. The messages confirmed my worst fears. There were dozens of exchanges between Sarah and Greg. Some were innocuous, but others were blatantly flirtatious. One message sent chills down my spine. "Had a great time last night. Wish you'd stayed longer." It was undeniable. My wife was having an affair with my boss. The betrayal felt like a knife to the heart. These were two people I trusted, one in my personal life, the other in my professional life. Together, they were destroying both. The fallout begins. I was devastated, but I wasn't about to let them get away with it. I knew I needed a plan. If I confronted them without evidence, they'd likely deny everything. I decided to gather more proof. Over the next few weeks, I hired a private investigator who provided me with photos and recordings. The evidence was irrefutable. Sarah and Greg were meeting in secret, using company resources to fund their escapades. But it didn't end there. I discovered that Greg had been bad-mouthing me to upper management, likely to set the stage for my eventual firing. He wanted me out of the company, clearing the way for him to continue his affair with Sarah without consequences. It was personal and professional sabotage, and I wasn't going to stand for it. Turning the tables with all the evidence in hand, I formulated a plan to expose them. My first step was to consult an attorney. I wanted to ensure that Sarah couldn't walk away with more than her fair share in the divorce. I also wanted to protect myself in case Greg tried to retaliate at work. Then, I scheduled a meeting with the HR department at my company. I presented them with the evidence of Greg's inappropriate behavior, emails, text messages, and expense reports that proved he was misusing company funds. HR took the allegations seriously, launching an internal investigation. Within a week, Greg was suspended. Confrontation and consequences. As for Sarah, I waited until everything was in motion before confronting her. I sat her down and showed her the evidence I had collected. She didn't even try to deny it. Tears streamed down her face as she apologized, but I wasn't interested in her excuses. She begged me to give her another chance, claiming the affair had been a mistake. But it wasn't just a mistake. It was a series of deliberate choices that destroyed our marriage. I filed for divorce the next day. The fallout was swift. Greg was fired after the company's investigation concluded. His reputation was ruined, and his wife filed for divorce shortly afterward. Sarah moved out of our home and tried to reconcile with me several times, but I stood my ground. I couldn't rebuild trust with someone who had betrayed me so completely. Moving forward in the months that followed, I focused on rebuilding my life. I found a new job at a company where I felt valued and respected. I started therapy to process the trauma and ensure I wouldn't carry bitterness into future relationships. It wasn't easy, but I eventually found peace. A lesson in strength. Looking back, I realize how much strength it took to navigate such a painful experience. Sarah and Greg tried to ruin me, both personally and professionally, but I refused to let them win. Their betrayal taught me an invaluable lesson. Never ignore your instincts, and never let anyone take advantage of your trust. Now I'm thriving, stronger, wiser, and ready to face whatever challenges life throws my way. When I confronted Sarah, I still remember the moment I confronted Sarah. My hands were trembling, my pulse racing, and my voice struggling to stay steady. I had spent days piecing together the puzzle, hoping I was wrong, that there was some explanation for the late-night texts, the suspicious excuses, and the coldness that had crept into our marriage. But there wasn't. The messages I found on her phone were undeniable. When I confronted her that evening, she initially denied everything. "You're imagining things," she said, her voice laced with feigned innocence. But when I showed her the screenshots of her conversations with Greg, her face turned pale. It was a look of guilt so stark it took the air out of the room. Then came the gaslighting. "If you weren't so busy with work, maybe I wouldn't have felt so lonely," she snapped, her voice rising. Her words stung like a slap. She was turning her betrayal into my fault, as if my long hours to provide for us justified what she had done. It wasn't just hurtful, it was cruel. I could feel the heat of anger rising in me, but I forced myself to stay calm. This wasn't the time to lose control. Greg's smug threat, while Sarah's reaction was painful, Greg's response was infuriating. The next day, he called me into his office. I could tell he was trying to appear nonchalant, leaning back in his chair with a smug smile that made my blood boil. "Listen," he began, his tone patronizing. These things happen. People make mistakes. Let's not blow this out of proportion. He paused, as if waiting for me to nod in agreement. I didn't. He leaned in closer, his smile fading. But if you try to stir up trouble, it won't end well for you. I've got connections, and I can make sure you never work in this industry again. The audacity of it left me speechless for a moment. Not only had this man betrayed me by sleeping with my wife, but now he was threatening my career. It was as if he expected me to roll over and accept his dominance, like some pawn in his twisted game. I left that meeting seething, my fists clenched so tightly that my nails dug into my palms. Planning my revenge, I'm not the type to act impulsively, no matter how much I wanted to storm out of that office and expose them both right then and there. If I was going to fight back, I needed a solid plan. Revenge wasn't just about satisfaction, it was about justice. First, I documented everything. Every screenshot of their texts, every receipt from late-night outings, every suspicious story Sarah had told me over the past few months. I even started keeping a journal, detailing her behavior and the lies she told. Next, I reached out to someone who deserved to know the truth as much as I did. Greg's wife, Emily. We had met a few times at company events, and she had always struck me as kind and genuine, someone who didn't deserve the pain Greg was undoubtedly causing her. I sent her an anonymous email with all the evidence I had gathered, apologizing for the heartbreak it would bring, but explaining that she deserved to know the truth. Emily responded the very next day. Her email was heartbreaking to read. She thanked me for my honesty, but admitted that she had suspected Greg of cheating before. I always felt like something was off, she wrote, but I never had proof. Thank you for giving me that. Emily wasn't the type to suffer in silence, and I admired her for it. The very next week, she confronted Greg in the most public way possible. During a staff meeting, she stormed into the room, phone in hand, and held up the incriminating messages for everyone to see. "You think you can humiliate me and get away with it?" she yelled, her voice shaking with rage and hurt. Tears streamed down her face, but there was steel in her voice. Greg stammered, trying to calm her down, but it was too late. Within minutes, the office was buzzing with gossip. The fallout was swift and brutal. HR got involved almost immediately. Greg, who had always carried himself with an air of untouchable authority, suddenly looked like a man drowning in his own lies. He tried to paint me as a disgruntled employee with an axe to grind, but the evidence was overwhelming. A coworker who had helped me recover the messages stepped forward to corroborate my claims, further sealing Greg's fate. At home, Sarah was falling apart. She begged me not to go through with the divorce. "We can work through this," she sobbed one night, tears streaming down her face. "I made a mistake, but I still love you." Her words felt hollow, like an echo of something that had once been real but was now dead and buried. "You didn't just cheat on me," I told her, my voice steady. "You mocked me, betrayed me, and threatened my livelihood. There's no coming back from that." Justice served. The divorce proceedings were as messy as I expected, but in the end, justice prevailed. The judge took one look at the mountain of evidence I presented and sided with me. Sarah's request for spousal support was denied, and I was awarded the house. She left with nothing but her regret and a few suitcases. Greg, meanwhile, faced his own reckoning. Emily filed for divorce, demanding a significant share of their assets, and from what I heard, she got exactly what she wanted. Greg was placed on indefinite leave from the company, and rumors began circulating that he was being quietly pushed out. By the time the dust settled, he had lost his job, his wife, and his reputation. Moving forward, rebuilding my life wasn't easy, but it was necessary. I found a new job in a different city, far away from the chaos Sarah and Greg had created. My parents and close friends rallied around me, their support a constant reminder that I wasn't alone. For a long time, I avoided relationships, afraid of opening myself up to that kind of pain again. But over time, I began to heal. I started focusing on myself, rediscovering hobbies I had abandoned and setting new goals for my future. Slowly, I began to feel whole again. When I finally started dating, I did so cautiously, my heart guarded but hopeful. Trust is fragile, I learned, and it's not something to be given lightly. But it's also worth fighting for when you find someone who truly deserves it. Lessons learned looking back. I'm proud of how I handled everything. Standing up for myself wasn't easy, especially against people who tried to intimidate and manipulate me. But their threats only made me stronger. Trust, I've learned, is one of the most precious things we can offer another person. When it's betrayed, there are consequences. Sarah and Greg learned that the hard way. Now, as I move forward, I carry those lessons with me. Life may have knocked me down, but I got back up stronger than ever. And for that, I'm grateful.